Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Ukrainian and American delegations have entered discussions over Europe's peace plan for the war-torn country. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. German Eurofighters arrive in Poland to protect the Baltic region. Crowds gather in Bulgaria to demand snap elections. Australia has introduced a ban on social media for teenagers, while the EU works on its own regulations. As Ukraine's president is presenting a new revised peace plan to his American counterpart, Pope Leo XIV, an American himself, is calling on Donald Trump not to exclude Europe from peace negotiations. Kazimierz Wysiak has the latest on the West's diplomatic efforts to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine.
Ukraine will soon send a revised peace plan to Washington. According to President Zelensky, there are now 3 separate documents.
The first is a framework document with 20 points, which is constantly changing, and that is normal, a living structure that must correspond with the interests of Ukraine, Europe and the world.
This peace proposal is Zelensky's response to the original 28-point plan, reportedly co-written by the United States and Russia. It included major concessions from Ukraine, like officially ceding land to Moscow. Will Donald Trump agree to the revised plan? That's rather unlikely if his latest interview for Politico is anything to go by.
Well, he's going to have to get on the ball and start accepting things. You know, when you're losing, who's losing?
In the same breath as bashing Ukraine, the US president also aired his grievances towards Europe.
They're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job.
In the recently released National Security Strategy, a document outlining the US's security priorities, the White House included points on firmly opposing NATO, welcoming any new members. And these attitudes are now receiving praise from Russia.
Of course, in many ways on the topic of NATO membership, on the topic of territories and so on the topic of how Ukraine is losing land. This is consistent with our understanding. And in many ways, the president touched upon the root causes of this conflict.
Thank you so much.
The alignment of views between Washington and Moscow has become so visible that even the Pope is appealing to Trump not to burn bridges with Europe.
Trying to reach a peace agreement without including Europe in the discussions is unrealistic. The war is in Europe, and I think that the security guarantees being sought today and for the future must involve Europe.
And security guarantees from Europeans, namely the coalition of the willing, are what the second document mentioned by Zelensky deals with.
The second document concerns security guarantees. I am awaiting relevant proposals from our military and their discussions with the Americans, and all this must be combined with the position of the coalition of the willing.
The third document touches on the future reconstruction of Ukraine, and it's that document that Kyiv sent to the US on Wednesday, even though it was the revised peace plan which was supposed to reach the White House by Tuesday. Making profit of the end of the war has also been on Trump's mind.
He is a person who I think is still in the 1980s in a way, and thinks he's a real estate dealer, so he thinks about these types of things, about transactional deals. He thinks Ukraine is sort of an irritant. You know, it gets in the way of the things he'd like to do, strike deals with other big countries.
Zelensky discussed peace with Trump and leaders of France, the UK and Germany on Wednesday. But it's unclear whether the call included presenting the revised proposal. Zelensky will also meet with the Europeans for another video call on Thursday. The Ukrainian president is now hinting at a potential breakthrough.
This week may bring news for all of us and for bringing the bloodshed to an end.
But that will require the agreement of both the United States and Russia. For TVP World, Kazimierz Wysiak.
The upcoming EU summit in Brussels may prove to be a lengthy one, as the President of the European Council has vowed to keep the talks going until European leaders reach a consensus on the use of Russia's frozen assets. And so we're going now live to our European correspondent in the Belgian capital, Alex Cadier. Good evening, Alex. Do you think that Europeans will decide to unblock the frozen assets by the end of the year?
Well, good evening, Maciek. Your guess is frankly as good as mine. What we do know is that the European Council meeting of all those 27 EU leaders next week will be a barnstormer. There are two main aspects here. Let's start with the first one. That 140 billion euro reparations loan for Ukraine using those Russian frozen assets. We have known that Belgium, which holds the assets at the Euroclear clearinghouse, has serious reservations about that reparations loan. It says there is a liability, there is a risk of a lawsuit from Russia, and that Belgium, does not want to shoulder the burden alone of what that lawsuit might cost, what the retaliation from Russia in other fields might be. They want assurances from all European partners that they will share the burden should a lawsuit be brought. That, of course, on top of financial and legal implications with the reparations loan. So clearly, the Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever digging his heels in when it comes to that reparations loan. The other option, of course, for funding Ukraine over the next couple of years would be more collective debt from the European Union. We know on that Hungary may object. Other countries may be reticent, particularly those with high debt levels already, to borrow more to keep funding Ukraine. They would rather be using Russia's frozen assets. For now, the response from Belgium is a solid no. There is another factor when it comes to those Russian frozen assets. For now, the sanctions that keep them frozen have to be renewed every 6 months. While the European Commission, that building behind me, wants them to be frozen indefinitely and wants to keep the sanctions permanent. That would avoid having to go back to the European Council every 6 months and fighting Hungary's objections every 6 months to be able to keep the assets frozen. It would also guarantee that they stay frozen in Europe and prevent the US from taking them as part of a peace deal. But then again, in the last few hours, the Belgian Prime Minister jumping in to say that plan to keep the assets frozen indefinitely brings up real legitimate concerns. So clearly, there are some serious disagreements in the heart of the European Union on how to keep funding Ukraine over the next couple of years. As you said, Antonio Costa, the EU Council President, has said this will be a difficult summit. He says they are close to a deal, and he will keep the leaders here in Brussels in the room, talking, negotiating over 3 days if he has to. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, late into the night to get a deal. It will be an epic clash between Belgium trying to block this deal and the other countries wanting to move forward. All of that, of course, will be here in Brussels next week, Maciek.
That was Alex Carrier reporting from Brussels. Thank you very much, Alex. 5 Eurofighter jets from Germany have arrived in Malbork, northern Poland, to begin their NATO air policing mission over the Baltic region. They will replace British and Swedish aircraft. Ovidiusz Ninczeja reports.
German fighter jets have been deployed to patrol the skies over Poland amid the 22nd Air Base in northern Poland near the city of Malbork. And it's here that for the next 4 months, 4 German Eurofighter Typhoon jets, just like this one behind my back, will be stationed alongside 150 personnel. This base is located just some 80 kilometers from the border with Russia. And today at this base, there was an official inauguration of the mission, which was attended by deputy defense ministers from both Poland and Germany.
Today, we both welcome the Eurofighter jets at Malbork and say goodbye to the German Patriot batteries that protected the airspace over southeastern Poland for the last 12 months. This clearly shows how important Germany's contribution to the defence of the eastern flank is. Early next year, a German combat engineer unit will arrive in Poland. Alongside our armed forces, our combat engineers, the German unit will help build the defence of the eastern flank. That is, the East Shield project.
Poland's airspace is NATO airspace. As partners and allies, we stand together with Poland. We are protecting the alliance's airspace together.
German officials have said that this deployment is in response to recent violations of NATO airspace and the drone incursions, particularly the one which took place on September 9th, 3 months ago. A number of drones violated the Polish airspace. Some of them were shot down, and in that mission to shoot them down, it was not just Polish jets that took part. but also jets from the Netherlands and Italy. And that stressed how important the cooperation within NATO is in a geopolitical situation like this one. So that's why, even though the hope here is that the personnel the German personnel stationed here will not have much work on their hands and many emergencies to respond to in the next months, there's also big gratitude from the Polish authorities for this show of support from an important ally. From the 22nd Air Base near Malbork, I'm Ovidiusz Nicieja.
Disgruntled Bulgarians have once again gathered in the center of Sofia today to protest the government and demand snap elections. The government itself is already facing its sixth motion of no confidence. Aisha Abachi reports.
This is Bulgaria's parliament, and massive crowds have gathered outside on the eve of yet another no-confidence vote, the sixth attempt to topple the government. At the center of the motion, accusations that Prime Minister Rosen Zelyakov's cabinet has failed on economic policy. The government has already announced it will scrap its controversial 2026 budget plan after massive nationwide rallies on December 1st. Tens of thousands protested what they said was a draft designed to mask deep-rooted corruption.
This is the first vote involving active participation of the youngest generation in Bulgaria. If this government has an ounce of sense, it will hear the voice of the Bulgarian citizens and resign immediately.
But not all protests are aimed against the government. Some Bulgarians yearn for stability, especially with Eurozone entry just ahead. The country is slated to adopt the euro on January 1st, 2026.
Exactly one step before entering the Eurozone, we do not need elections.
Zelyakov's administration took office 11 months ago after snap elections in October 2024, the country's seventh parliamentary election in 3.5 years.
I think that a stable government could only exist on the grounds of common understanding that institutionalized corruption should not be on the agenda of such a government.
One of the causes of this uncontrolled exercise of political power is the ruling coalition's inability to govern independently.
But the problem is that this coalition is supported by the party that traditionally represents the Turkish minority in Bulgaria, that was recently taken over by the figure Delan Peevski.
Peevski is a Bulgarian oligarch sanctioned for corruption by the US.
We want the resignation of this government and the resignation of Delan Peevski, and simply that he is no longer part of this authority. We want to be heard.
Protesters are now calling for the government's resignation, but their grievances seem to be extending beyond finances and into a broader wave of dissatisfaction. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
Australia introduced today a ban on social media for minors under the age of 16, some of whom have already started working hard at circumventing the new regulations. But since early access to social media is regarded as a major issue in Europe too, the EU has adopted a different approach to tackle the problem. Piotr Miszczuk has this report.
I don't know, I might maybe cry because losing connection with my friends.
In Australia, social media for everyone under the age of 16 is no more.
From December 10, if you're under 16, you're no longer allowed to have a social media account.
While many had their accounts closed by social media platforms, others have sought to find a workaround. Some of them have succeeded.
TikTok this morning gave me a notification saying you have to be 16 now, but I just said okay, and it let me go through without anything else.
So I went with the face option. I squinted up my eyes and face, looked at the camera, covered up my teeth, and it worked. Just let me through.
Given how ineffective the ban might prove to be, Professor of Internet Law Matthias Ketterman told TVP World that the European Union has trodden a more effective path.
States always like to prohibit things because it's so much easier than to actually interact with companies. And it's easier to say, we're going to do a blanket ban than to, as the European Union has done, then to force big companies to be more responsive to the challenges of young online use, reducing how they use their data, making their systems less addictive.
Some EU member states have regulations at the national level too. Several European countries require parental consent to set up a child's social media account, but those appear easy to circumvent. Denmark is the latest country set to follow in Australia's footsteps, planning to ban such platforms for all under 15. Last month, the European Parliament agreed on a non-binding resolution that sets the minimum age of 16 for social media use.
When it comes to an under 16 EU-wide social media ban, this is the very start of the process.
Now, an expert panel will be set up to work on a policy should the EU decide to impose more regulations on social media use for children and teenagers.
Kids are being confronted and flooded with advertising, with sometimes harmful content. We need to protect them from that. And we need to make sure that they cannot allow and that they cannot access illegal content that is circulating on these social media platforms.
But Poland, alongside the Czech Republic, Spain, Cyprus and Portugal, will find itself in the EU dock for failing to adopt the Digital Services Act, aimed at creating a safer digital space. But implementing the act is well underway, and a relevant bill will soon be submitted to Polish Conservative President Karol Nawrocki to sign into law, according to Poland's Deputy Minister of Digital Affairs, Dariusz Standerski.
I really count on the President in that matter, because we were working in the Parliament on this regulation alongside with our opposition.
The leader of a junior party in the Polish ruling coalition, Szymon Hołownia, has long tried to push forward a bill barring the use of smartphones in schools. In August, the bill was sent to the Parliament's Committee on Education and Science, but according to TVP World sources in the Ministry of Digital Affairs, it has since been put on the back burner. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
Kamila Rachimova is the latest in a series of Russian tennis players who have chosen to play for a different country. From now on, she will compete under Uzbekistan's flag. John Todd reports on Russia's great tennis exodus.
Tennis star Kamila Rachimova winning at the Women's Tennis Association 125 Challenger tournament in Angers last week. The 24-year-old is the latest high-profile Russian player to reject her motherland, swapping citizenship for Uzbekistan, writing on Monday,
"My decision is based on my ambitions, career goals, and what I feel will give me the best opportunities to develop as an athlete."
Earlier this month, Anastasia Potapova revealed she will now be competing under the Austrian flag. In October, Moscow-born player Maria Timofeeva also chose to represent Uzbekistan, while Daria Kasatkina, who is an outspoken critic of the war in Ukraine, in March announced she would be playing for Australia. Why walk away from Moscow? Players from Russia are banned from team competitions like the Davis and Billie Jean Cups and the Olympics.
But also there's other layers to it, such as, difficulty of obtaining visas. And also you need to think about opportunities for sponsorship. So are sponsors going to want to be associated with Russian players?
President Putin and Russia pride themselves on their sporting prowess, famously cheating at the Sochi Winter Olympics to gain more medals.
Lying and cheating about your whatever opinion on Ukraine or attitude on global affairs and Russian dictatorship, even taking on somebody else's citizenship just in order to actually then enlarge Russia's glory in sports is quite an okay thing. So I think we have these two realities or two interpretations in parallel here: official regret, but secret joy about this successful trick.
The tennis exodus will likely be a public blow to the sports fan president. While he's always portrayed as a winner at home, it's game, set and match for those who've escaped his influence. This is John Todd for TVP World.
As the diplomatic efforts over the war in Ukraine are rapidly gaining pace with the end of the year, so do the discussions on the use of Russia's frozen assets, which the EU wants to tap to help the war-torn country. And to talk about it, we're joined by Kinga Radłowska, Director of the Centre for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute, Europe. Good evening.
Good evening.
So Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, says he will keep EU leaders debating as long as it takes, but in the end they will have to come up with a solution to the issue of Russia's frozen assets. Do you share his optimism that they will in fact do that by the end of the year?
I would like to believe that's going to be the case, because Russian frozen assets are no longer a technical issue. They are a backbone of Europe's Ukraine strategy. And the EU has been looking for ways to bridge the funding gap of Ukrainian budget, and just to make sure Kiev doesn't hit a fiscal cliff April next year. The shortfall is assessed for 70 billion euros. And then on top of that, the US is pressuring for concessions. So overall, the EU and Europe more broadly doesn't have much choice unless it wants to put more burden on EU taxpayers.
I see. Well, but so far Brussels, and I'm not talking about the European Commission, I'm talking about the beautiful country of Belgium. So Belgians are quite reluctant to release the frozen assets because they are afraid that the legal burden of what may come after will be fully placed on them. What guarantees can Belgium be provided with?
Well, so Belgium has been voicing its concerns for a long time now. They are referring to the bilateral investment treaty signed with USSR in 1989. But the European Commission's stance is clear. The European Commission claims that legal ground is clear, and on top of that, EU member states will provide guarantees against the 210 billion euros of the reparation loan that will be shared across the bloc based on the gross national income, with Germany providing a backstop of a 25% of this amount by the largest share. And this has been declared by Chancellor Merz last week.
Can Hungarians, Slovaks, or Czechs, most probably these days, just say, no, we won't pay for it?
Yes, Maciej, unfortunately then they can do so, and if they do so, it just means that other EU member states need to increase their guarantees, their backstops. Maybe other non-EU countries will chip in. So there are different options on the table. Hopefully the EU policymakers and heads of states will reach a consensus on this very soon in Brussels.
You mentioned the US. Now, what is the American approach to EU's attempts to use the frozen assets? Because they have slightly different views, right?
Yes, you know, it's Europe that is holding those assets, namely Euroclear in Belgium, 18 billion is held in France and under the deposit of French financial institutions, and a bit more scattered across Europe. UK holds 20 billion pounds, so it's Europe that is holding this card, and of course the US would like to push Europe on this. We've seen in the first peace plan that leaked.
Yes, the 28-point plan.
Yes, the 28 points. There was a mention, there was even an outrageous proposal that the US will take those assets and this will cover US investment. This seems to be
joint US-Russian
investment. This seems to be highly unrealistic and against any legal background, but it has been a quite strong push toward EU heads of states and member states to actually reach a consensus and reach it rapidly.
Right. Now, do you think that given the recent tensions and the pressure under which the Ukrainian government finds itself in negotiations with the Americans, should Kiev still insist on the use of Russia's frozen assets?
Well, Kiev should insist. It doesn't have much choice. The plan is that out of 210 billion euros, 115 will be used for Ukraine's defense. Another 50 will fuel the Ukrainian budget, and another 45 will serve as to repay a previous G7 loan. So the money is badly needed, and indeed, Kiev should insist on Europe taking a more muscular stance on this and making a full use of those assets.
Right, because as you say, the money from the frozen assets, this is meant to cover Ukraine's expenses in 2026 and 2027. Now, can Europe, realistically speaking, afford to support Ukraine in the long term without these frozen assets? And what happens after 2027? If the war still rages on?
Well, this is a question of a broader economic security strategy of the EU. We need to think proactively, we need to think long-term, we need to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it's needed, because Ukraine is fighting for the security of the European continent. So it's our vital interest to continue supporting. If needed, if the EU doesn't reach a consensus, the European taxpayer will need to chip in. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's see.
The European taxpayer may have to chip in. Now, don't you think that the war fatigue that we are actually feeling right here in Europe is that it would be just, a touch too much for the European taxpayer to indeed pay even more if the Russian money is there?
European taxpayers are also people that witnessed across Europe numerous attacks of Russian sabotage. So what we've been witnessing in last months is that Russia is becoming increasingly aggressive and is trying to undermine European internal security. So it's our vital interest to indeed keep supporting Ukraine, but also to look into our own backyard and see how Russia is undermining our democracies, undermining our economic and social resilience.
Why is Russia ramping up its sabotage campaign in Europe right now?
Well, just to put a bit more pressure, but also just to test our resilience. The model of Russian sabotage is quite cheap for Russia. Russia is often recruiting disposable agents, one-day agents. They recruit them, Russian agents, they recruit them via social media, very often Telegram. They pay them via cryptocurrencies, very small amounts. So for Russia, it's cheap, it's effective, the sort of agency is easily deniable, but the impact can be enormous if such an act of sabotage is successful. That would undermine the feeling and sort of the perception of our security and social resilience.
Right, so the Polish government has prepared a bill on regulating the cryptocurrency issue, also to face this threat of Russian sabotage in Europe. Do you think that this bill is much needed in this regard?
It's very much needed. Cryptocurrencies are being currently used by Russia and other hostile states to circumvent the G7 sanctions. They are used to procure and purchase dual-use goods that end up fueling military equipment, Russian military equipment, and they are used to pay for Russian sabotage on our own territory. Unregulated over-the-counter exchanges are a weak point, something we should look into. And basically, not supervising cryptocurrencies and other alternative financial systems just creates a permissive financial ecosystem to finance Russia's activities globally, but also in Europe.
We've begun with money and we must end now. Also, talking about money, Kinga Radłowska, Director of the Centre for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute Europe, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Maciej.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.